Okay, today's lesson is on the zero product property. So to solve for the zero product property, our steps, the first step is set equation equal to 0. So what that means is you want to make sure that you move all your terms to one side, and that way there's a 0 on the other side. Step 2 is to factor. Step 3 is to set the factors equal to 0. And step 4 is to solve. Okay, so let's look at number 1. If we look at this problem, first step is to set equal to 0, all set. So step 1 is done. Step 2 is to factor. Oh look, step 2 is done as well, it's already factored. Step 3 says take the factors and set equal to 0. So our first factor is 3n plus 2. I set that equal to 0. And then n minus 2 set equal to 0. So that's step 3. And then step 4 is to solve. So if I'm going to solve this equation, I get minus 2 from both sides. 3n equals negative 2. And then I'm going to divide by 3. N equals negative 2/3. And if I solve this one, I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and n equals 2. So the answers to this equation are n equals negative 2/3 and n equals 2. And if you wanted to, you could go plug those back in and check to make sure they worked. Okay. Anytime we have two factors, we're going to get two answers. Okay, and these are all quadratic equations. We've talked about quadratic equations before, and those always have two answers. So let's look at number 2. Same thing, this is already set equal to 0, so step 1 is done. Step 2, it's already factored. So step 3 is to take the factors and set them equal to 0. Okay, and then step 4 is to solve. Forgot to put the 4 over there. So step 4 over here is to solve. So we're going to plus 8 to both sides. 4x equals 8 and divide by 4. X is 2. And then we're going to minus 1 to each side. 2x equals negative 1. Divide by the 2. X equals negative 1/2. So that's the equation there. So we've done steps 1 through 4, and we've solved our equation. So now we're looking at number 3. First step is to set equal to 0. So it's set equal to 0 already, so step 1 is done. Step 2 is to factor. When we look at this equation, we see there's two terms. The first thing we look for is their greatest common factor. There is nothing that goes into both of these terms, so that's all set. So then we go two terms is going to be, are they perfect squares? Yes. So we're going to factor by taking the square root. So the square root of 16 is 4y, and then put that at the beginning of each. The square root of 9 is 3. And if you remember, this is called difference of squares because of the minus. So one gets a minus and one gets a plus. And then we set that equal to 0. So step 2 is to factor. Step 3, we're going to take our factors and set them equal to 0. And we're going to solve for step 4. So we're going to plus 3 here. 4y equals 3, divide by 4, and y is 3/4. And then we're going to minus 3 here. 4y equals negative 3, divide by 4, y equals negative 3/4. Number 4 is very similar. So you're going to, again, factor. It's difference of squares again, so the square root of 49 is 7. The square root of 25 is 5, 1 plus and 1 minus. Step 1 is done. Step 2 is factored. Step 3, 7w minus 5 equals 0. 7w plus 5 equals 0. And then we're going to add 5. 7w equals 5 minus 5. 7w equals negative 5. Divide by 7. W equals 5 over 7. And if we divide by 7 here, w equals negative 5 over 7. So then we go to the next ones. Step 1, set equation equal to 0. This is not equal to 0 right now, so we need to minus a 12n to the other side. And we always list our terms in order, so 8n squared minus 12n plus 4 equals 0. So step 1 is now done. Step 2 is to factor. First thing we're going to factor out is a GCF, greatest common factor. A 4 goes into all these terms. So we factor the 4 and we get 2n squared minus 3n plus 1. And then we got to factor this as a trinomial. So if we remember, our rule is to make an x. So 2 times 1 is 2, negative 3. So what multiplies, sorry, off the page. What multiplies to 2 and adds to negative 3? Negative 2 and negative 1. So now we split the middle. And then we're going to group. So I'm going to use a different color so we can see the grouping. First 2, last 2. The 4 stays in front. The GCF here is 2n, and we get n minus 1. The GCF over here is negative 1, and we get n minus 1. And then we take that inside here. N minus 1 gets listed. We cross that out, and we get 2n minus 1. And the 4 goes in front, equals 0. So now we've just gotten step 3 done. So actually step 2 done. That is all factoring. So then step 3 is to set the factors equal to 0. So n minus 1 equals 0 and 2n minus 1 equals 0. And now we're going to solve. So we add 1 to both sides. N equals 1. And we're going to add 1 to both sides here. And we get 2n equals 1. And then we divide by the 2. N is 1/2. So that's step 4, solving. So now let's look at number 6. Set equal to 0. Yep, step 1 is done. Step 2, is it factored? No. So now we need to factor this. So there is no greatest common factor because 7 is prime. So we're going to do first times last is 28. 16. What multiplies to 28 and adds to 16 is our question. Let's see, 14 times 2. So split the middle. 4y squared plus 14y plus 2y plus 7. And then we're going to group. First 2, last 2, GCF. Here is 2y. And we get 2y plus 7. Over here the GCF is 1. And then we 2y plus 7 and 2y plus 1. So now we have step 2 done. Step 3 is to set our factors equal to 0. So 2y plus 7 equals 0, 2y plus 1 equals 0. So that's step 3. And then step 4, we're going to solve these. So minus the 7 from both sides, 2y equals negative 7, divide by 2. Y is negative 7 over 2. And then minus 1 from each side, 2y equals negative 1, divide by 2. Y equals negative 1 over 2. So that's the work. The next page is your 8 problems to try on your own. Again, you're solving them using the 4 steps.